All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Today's topic is raised beds, and our speaker is Master Gardener Jane Zisk. Jane has been a Master Gardener since 2017, and she was introduced to the wonders of gardening as a little girl and has had her hands in the soil ever since. She installed the first raised bed in her vegetable garden about 5 years ago and was instantly hooked. Jane now has 6 raised beds and is pondering how she might fit 1 or 2 more into her garden next spring. Don't we all, right? Jane is married with 2 sons, of whom she is ridiculously proud, even though neither one spends much time in the garden. But I'm sure you're influencing them as we speak. Jane holds a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics and a master's degree in applied mathematics. So thank you, Jane, and thank you everyone for being here. So it's all yours.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So welcome to Elevate Your Gardening, Raise Your Beds. And by that, I mean, let's take our gardens to the next level. So I was born in a house with a garden, and this is how my dad taught me how to garden, traditionally in rows, right? You till your soil or you turn it every year to loosen it up and get it ready for planting. You put in little rows with little walkways in between and maybe a walkway around the edge. And when you plant all your stuff and it starts growing, it looks really pretty. I think this is a very inviting garden. But when I started doing this in my yard, I found that having a single row of one particular crop was just too much. I mean, there was only so much lettuce 2 of us could eat, and my sons weren't eating salads and all that kind of stuff. In addition, I found that the space between the rows and even around the garden was just an invitation for weeds. And I am a lazy gardener. I do not want to weed. So I thought, there's got to be a better way for me. So what I did was I just sort of put the number of plants I thought we could use in places that they seemed they'd be happy to grow in. I put down landscape fabric to cover the walkways so that there would be fewer weeds growing. And because I didn't really have a plan and I sort of put cucumbers here and a zucchini there, my walkways were sometimes really large. And so I was wasting space in the garden. Sometimes my walkways were just about the right size. Sometimes they were too narrow, which I really didn't mind because being a gardener, I love being up close and personal with my plants. But it just, it had its issues. And I'm going to now show you what I don't show many people. So because you're all my close friends, I know you'll keep a secret. Here is the other side of my garden, which was just a horrible mess. It was very productive. But you could see because I just sort of put things here and there, and I sometimes forgot how large zucchini plants get and how long pumpkin vines can grow. It wasn't well laid out. Things were crowded over here, but yet if you look on the right-hand side of the picture, you see there were these lovely tall weeds growing. And you can see along the bottom right of the picture more weeds. And you can see that I have very heavy clay soil. What that means is when it dries out, it is like concrete. So there is no way you're going to get those weeds out. So being lazy and having clay soil, it's like, you know what? It is time to get to the next level. I need to raise beds. Now, remember this picture because once I put my raised beds in, that's the same part of the garden. Right? Unbelievable. Made such a difference for me. Now, what is a raised bed? Well, it's a frame, not a box. It's a box without a top and without a bottom. So it's a frame. It sits directly on the native soil, and you fill it with soil and organic matter that is in contact with your native soil. And the reason why you want it in contact, because you want that raised bed to be part of the whole ecosystem in the garden. You want earthworms to come up in there. You want the roots of the plants to go down as deeply as they can. and get all the nutrients and interact with the ecosystem of the native garden. For me, you can see immediately it provided some structure and some boundaries for my garden, which I sorely needed. Now, this is my garden a little more currently. I have a bunch of raised beds, and look how neat and tidy that is. I have space for my plants. It sort of makes me sit and plan a little better how large the plants will get and where they should go. It's a much better use of space because I now have the same walkways every year. I can control the quality of the soil, right? So I can dig deep down into my clay, amend it, but I can also make sure I put good quality topsoil and organic matter into the beds themselves. Being raised, the soil in a raised bed will warm up a little more quickly in the spring. And so that way, if you get spring fever and you really want to plant things soon, like I'm starting to feel now, you can do that. Because you're not walking in the beds, you don't have any soil compaction. So you really don't need to turn that soil or rototill it. When I go to plant in my raised beds every spring and summer, I just take a little hand trowel and I dig a little hole and I plant my seed or my seedling. It gives me much better drainage because I'm not relying on hard clay. I have nice soil to deal with. It's much easier maintenance. You know, I'm a lazy gardener. I don't want to weed. So I don't have to weed my walkways because I have sometimes 2 layers of landscape fabric down. And I can just weed in the bed themselves. In addition, once your plants start growing, they'll shade out the weeds anyway. So it's really, really easy. I don't have to rototill anything anymore. And as you can see in this picture, I can put trellises at the ends of the beds so that I can grow up my cucumbers and my snap peas and my snow peas and anything else that will climb. But wait, there's more. The beds are easily accessible. So you want them at most 4 feet wide so that you can reach into the middle of the bed, as you see this gardener doing in the picture on the left. If you can reach into the middle of the bed from both sides, you can reach everything in the entire bed. In addition, if you have someone who either doesn't like to or can't or doesn't want to bend, or you have a garden that you're trying to make accessible for folks in wheelchairs, you can just build your beds that much higher, and then everybody can garden, which is a fabulous thing. The last big advantage, and it's really a big advantage, is that you conserve resources with raised beds. In my old kind of row garden, I would have to rototill the whole thing, and then I would amend the soil everywhere because I had no idea where I was going to plant. With a raised bed, you know where you're planting your vegetables, so you can just fertilize or amend the soil in the bed. And the same is true with watering. Rather than having to water all over the place, you know you're just watering in the bed itself. So it's a really win-win-win-win-win all around. Are there any disadvantages? Well, it depends on your perspective. Some raised bed gardens, depending on what you make them of and how they're situated, are permanent or semi-permanent. So for example, in this picture, these look like they're made out of heavy kind of railroad tie posts, and those would be kind of hard to move, right? You'd have to empty the soil out, get somebody to help you move the bed, put the soil back in. The walkways, I don't know if that's gravel or mulch, but you'd have to rake that away for the new area. So you can't really move them around very much. But if you plan it out well, you don't have to, right? The raised beds can dry out a little more quickly, but you know, my raised beds are only 1 by 6 high, so they're about 5 1/4 inches high, and even in the hottest summer, I don't find them drying out that much. And it takes some planning and building and thinking, but in the end, I really believe it's well worth any effort that you put in. Now let me stop here 1 second and make a quick distinction, because when you Google raised beds, which I know you will, and you should, you'll find things like this picture on the left, which It's certainly raised and elevated, but this kind of planter functions more like a container garden because it has a bottom, obviously, to hold everything in. It's not connected to the native soil. It's not part of the natural ecosystem of your native soil, okay? These do have their places, right? They're great for patio gardening, or if you have a very small area, or if you want to garden on a balcony. And depending on the depth of the planter, you really can't put in root vegetables or things like tomatoes with really long roots. It's really best for herbs and lettuces, maybe some radishes, things that are not very deeply rooted. So these things that are up on legs, I call planters. The picture on the right is the raised bed. It's sitting directly on the soil. There's no bottom connected to the native soil in your yard. Okay. I love the idea, Jane. Now, where do I start? Well, like everything else in real estate, it's location, location, location. So we're going to talk about site selection of where you put it, how much sun and water you need, what kind of soil to use. We'll talk about the size of your bed, the materials used to construct it, maybe depending on your budget. We'll talk about some shapes and configurations. We'll hit all those topics. Are you ready? Let's go. Where do I put it? Well, typically the common wisdom is to put it close to your house. There's your back door. You'd like it right when you walk out. On the right, you see there's a spigot with a hose, so you're very close to a water source. This way, you walk out of your garden. If you're cooking and you say, oh, I need some basil, you can quick run out, grab it, and go back in. You'll see everything every day, and it just looks pretty when it's growing, right? It's right within easy reach. You'll weed it, you'll take care of it. Now, that said, this is where my garden is located, okay? It is far away from my house. You can't even really see the back door from where I took this photo. The spigot is around the corner of the garage, right? It's probably, well, I have to hook up two at least 100-foot hoses to get into the garden. So it's a long way from the house. But this works for me because at the time we put the garden in, my children were very small, like preschool age. And I really wanted to maximize the amount of yard space, free and clear, that they had to run around and play. And at that time too, we had one of those big swing sets, and I preferred to have that set close to the house so that I could watch my children. The point with this is that think about, when you're thinking where to put your raised beds, think about more than just the site of the raised bed. Think about how you use your space in general. I also knew that setting my garden far away from the house would not prevent me from going in there every day. I love my garden. It's my place of peace, my happy place. So I will be in there as often as I can be. I don't mind dragging hoses there every day. I don't mind carrying watering cans there every day. In fact, the downspout, you see the white downspout on my garage here, that's where I usually hook up my rain barrels. So I'm hauling them, 150 to 100 feet. And I don't care because I don't belong to a gym. My garden is my gym. So the other message here is that there are no garden police. We may tell you, put it near your back door, but if that doesn't work for you, put it wherever it'll work. Doesn't matter. Now, as far as sun, most vegetables really are happy with 6 to 8 hours of direct sun per day, meaning the sun is beaten down on them. So you need to watch out for shade trees when you're selecting your site. This is a picture of a tree in my front yard near the driveway. I wouldn't put a garden there, but this is just to show you how much shade a tree can really throw. If I were to go outside at, say, 2:30 in the afternoon, like this picture on the extreme right, I would think that I could put my garden to the left of the shade there and be fine. But if you look at the pictures I took earlier in the day, that's not true. That garden would be shaded until 2:30 in the afternoon. So vegetables planted there would not get full sun. So a good idea when you're thinking of where you want to put your garden is to go out and snap a picture periodically through the day to see where the shade is, because it may surprise you. Fences also throw shade, so be careful if you don't have a chain link fence, which I noticed are kind of out of fashion now. If you have a solid fence, that'll throw shade too. Now, whoever put this garden in here, I don't know what time of year it is or what time of day. Maybe they're trying to grow a shade garden, because I'm not certain vegetables would survive here. The other funny thing about this picture is I don't know if the raised bed went in first or the tree went in first, but this is going to be in pretty dense shade. The positive thing with this picture is in the lower right, you see something that looks like a rain barrel. So it is close to a water source. But think about fences and think about walls. It's tempting to put your raised beds right up against your house, especially if it's a brick house, because the bricks get warm and it'll warm the soil more in the spring and even in the fall. But look how it's in the shade. Of course, this is a great spot for a rain barrel here, right near the downspout. And I see a hose in the bottom right. So it's near a water source again, but you have to watch out for shade. And the other thing with this setup is that I don't know how easily it is to reach the far end of the bed that's closest to the wall. So accessibility might be an issue here. Think about if your yard is hilly or not. They can be a challenge. You'd either have to put your raised bed, build it into the hill, or if it's a really steep hill, you'd have to, as the picture on the right shows, build a step garden down the hill. Level ground, if you can manage it, is so much easier, so much easier. Now, here's a picture of a nice, good, level, sunny spot. I love this. If you thought about building just 1 or 2 beds in here, but you prepared the whole area with the fencing, you'd have room to grow. I would suggest if you're new to gardening and new to raised beds, you try 1, maybe 2 beds the first year, just to, get your feet wet a little bit, see how you like it, what you might like to grow. And you can always add more as you gain more experience. Let's talk about water. We don't want too little. We don't want too much. We want it just right, like Goldilocks. If you have an area that doesn't have a lot of water access, you have to think about where's the nearest spigot. Will I want to have a rain barrel? Will I be willing to haul a hose out there? Will I water with a watering can? Think about if your area has too much water. My neighbor next door in the heavy rains has a lovely little pond in the middle of his backyard every time it rains. That would not be a good spot for a raised bed, because the roots of your plants would be underwater all the time and you'd drown them. But the other thing to think about is, do you have underground automatic sprinklers on a timer? How many times have you driven around in the rain and see people's sprinklers on, watering at the same time? You don't want to overwater, and it's best really not to water your vegetables from above, because it keeps them too wet and it might promote fungus and mold and icky stuff. So the ideal amount of water per week is 1 inch per week for a vegetable garden. So you have to think about how you're going to provide that when there's no rain. My recommendation is to use soaker hoses in your raised bed. You can see on the left, you can just snake it right around where the plants are, hook it up to a hose, preferably even on a timer, so that you just turn it on and the timer will turn it off at the appropriate time. You will need to remember to move your hose before a lawnmower comes through, or you'll have a big uh-oh moment and you'll be running off to Home Depot for new hoses. The picture on the right shows you that you can do all sorts of configurations with your hoses, depending on how much water you feel each plant requires. Or you can water by hand with a watering can or a hose with a nozzle. It's up to you, whatever you feel fits into your lifestyle best. Now the soil. The soil in your garden is the single most important part of your raised bed, right? That's where the plants are going to live. That's where they're going to get all their nutrients. It's their home. And you want to put the most money you can into the home for your plants so that you get the best yield possible. The rule of thumb is to have roughly 50-50 good quality soil and organic matter. So you want to purchase your soil from a reputable nursery, and they will deliver by the cubic yard because you'll know you'll get good quality. Some places, I have a nursery near me that will deliver half soil, half mushroom compost, which is just divine because you want to have about half of your mixture to be organic matter, whether it's compost or well-aged manure. You don't want to put fresh manure in because that will burn the roots of your plants. Or if you put in leaf mold. Leaf mold is when you rake up your autumn leaves, and I do rake because the garden is my gym. Rake up your autumn leaves, maybe run them over with a lawnmower a little bit to shred them up, put them in a pile, leave them be for a year or two, and then you'll end up with this beautiful black gold, really. And that's really good for your garden too. So think about your site, your water, and invest in good soil for your raised bed. Are there any questions at this point?
Actually, we're doing pretty well on the questions.
Excellent.
Diane's been trying to answer things in the Q&A.
Okay.
So as a reminder, people can put their questions there.
There is one about how long do you water the garden if you don't have a timer?
With the soaker hose or even
Yeah.
with a nozzle. Well, with a nozzle, you water it until it's good and wet, but you don't want it puddled, right? Just good and wet. With the soaker hose, you'll have to look and see, soaker hoses can vary about how much water they put out. But when I used to soaker hose, I did it for about a half hour. And so when you run it the first time, go out and check periodically and see how it's doing. And then you'll be able to decide for yourself in your own environment what works best.
I think a good rule of thumb is the soaker hose should moisten the soil at least 6 inches deep.
There you go.
So
Right.
I
Stick your
wanted
finger in
to contribute to a question that came in about putting something underneath your raised bed. Like when you set up your raised bed, do you put anything underneath it, like a?
Oh, we'll talk about that.
You're
No,
going to talk about that, okay? Because of voles, that was my. I want to contribute about that, so you'll get to that.
yes.
Okay.
also,
Someone says.
do you recommend any kind of bagged soil for the raised bed?
I do not, because, one year I bought bag soil. I decided to put tomatoes in containers, and my tomatoes were not doing well. And I was scratching my head and wondering, and I realized when I stuck a pH meter in that it was too acid. You never really know what's in those bags. So I don't recommend using bag soil. That's why I said get it from a reputable nursery nearby. It's really worth doing that for the health of your soil.
And if somebody's going to use a bag of Pro Mix to fill in, should they mix it with anything else? I don't know if Pro Mix is the best thing to use for.
Yeah, I hesitate on that. I really, after my tomato experience, I really shy away from bagged soil in general. Yeah. And you also don't know what kind of fertilizer stuff they're putting in there, and you just don't know what it is. Are we good? Shall we move on?
Well, Diane, I'm not sure if I'm reading the questions out or if you are. Like,
No.
I got distracted. Did you mention about the strawberries question?
No, because that's kind of more of a strawberry question.
All right, why don't we move ahead and we'll
Yeah.
see if we cover some of these as we
We'll
go
sweep
through.
up as we go.
We are getting a few questions on the types of wood to use. Will you?
Oh, we're getting to that.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
So
indeed. Here we
everybody
go.
just hold tight. We'll cover it.
Yeah. Here we go.
Like,
First, let's talk about the size. I'm
Jane,
sorry. Yes.
I just like to interject something. I'm getting some emails and texts that people can't find the handout.
Okay.
I'm trying to respond to those as they're coming in. Some people don't have the link, so Later on, when I send out a link to the recording, I'll reattach the handout just in case.
Great.
But check your spam and junk folders, because if your email program didn't recognize the address that sent it to you, it's going to put it there instead. Okay. So if you registered before 6:30 this morning, you should have received the handout. Okay. Okay.
All
That's
right.
it.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. So let's talk about the size of the beds that we want. I had said before, no more than 4 feet wide so that you can reach in the middle. Now, if that's too far of a reach for you, there's nothing that says you can't make it narrower. 3, 3.5. I would not go any narrower than 2 feet, because then you really limit the space you have, and it kind of doesn't pay. So an easy arm's reach into the middle of the bed. Now, lengths are typically done in 4-foot increments, right? A lot of the do-it-yourself kits you'll find do that. And so it really, the length of your bed depends on how much space you have. Mine are 4 by 8. Some people might have 4 by 12, right? So however long you feel like you'll be able to take care of and maintain and plant is how long it should be. As for height, it depends on, again, how much you want to bend and crawl around on the dirt, or what you want to grow. So my raised beds are made with 1 by 6s, so they're only roughly 6 inches high. But that's okay, because I amended the soil below it before I put them down, so the roots of my potatoes and my tomatoes can go far down. So if you're just going to do lettuces and radishes and herbs, you can do a 6 to 12 inch height. If your soil's not amended, you may want to go higher than that so that you know you have good quality soil for the roots all the way down. I hope I was clear with that. What are the material options? There are many. I chose wood for my garden because it's readily available. It's lightweight. I can go, to the lumber yard or to the big box stores, and I can pick up my own wood and I can fix it, put it in my car and drive it home, and I don't need to drag my sons or my husband with me. It's easy to transport. It's easy to work with. You just need really maybe a drill to pre-drill holes, a screwdriver, and that's about it. It's an excellent do-it-yourself option if you're going to build it from scratch. Kits make it even easier. There are a plethora of kits available online and in stores. Is there anything not so great about wood? Well, it does eventually rot. So you don't want to use pine boards, because those go pretty quickly. I chose cedar because I could get it and I like it, and it'll last about 8 to 12 years. You can get Douglas fir. It's a little less expensive, and that'll last about 5 to 8 years. So you're not rebuilding them constantly. Now, people sometimes ask me about composite materials, like a Trex decking. Can you use that? You can, but it's far more flexible than you would imagine. It bends very easily. So if you try to use that for a raised bed, maybe 1 level height, they're also not, I don't think they're 6 inches wide, but 1 level height might not bow too much. But if you're going to do 2 or more, it's going to bow out a lot from the pressure of the soil in the raised bed. So you'll have to put in some kind of post or support or rebar to make sure that stays straight. So my recommendation is not to use composite materials. Go for wood if you're going to go that route. You could use brick. This is lovely. It gives it a more formal feel in the garden, right? You want to think about what would you like to look at, what fits in your style. Brick is readily available. Again, I can haul brick myself in my car. For a big raised bed, it might take me a couple of trips, but I could do it. It's certainly long lasting. It's inexpensive because bricks, I Googled it, they're about 50 cents a piece. But for me, personally, brick was not a good option. For me, it's not an easy do-it-yourselfer project. I'm not a mason. I don't happen to know any masons. So this didn't work for me. The brick does get warm in the heat, the summer heat, so you might need to be careful what you plant right next to the brick. And it's hard to now add on to this bed once you have it built, right? So, the other thing too, so not only am I a lazy gardener, I'm a little klutzy. I know my shins and my legs would be just bruised to kingdom come because I'd be bumping into those sharp corners all the time. But, you know, brick gives you a nice little spot to sit and garden if you want to do that. So you have to think about what you like. Cinder block is another option. It's readily available. It's long lasting. It's a really easy do-it-yourself because you just stack them. You don't have to have any mortar in between them. They are very heavy, very heavy. The bed, because they're so heavy, isn't as easily expandable as a wood bed might be. And look at these holes in the top of the cinder block. I just know that weeds would be popping up in there right and left, and that would aggravate me to no end. They cost a little more than brick, and yeah, I just don't like it. I'd be banging into those and scraping up my legs too. Metal is another option that kind of surprised me. There are a lot of vendors where you can mail order metal beds. They come in various shapes and sizes. They're all rather circular, either circles or ovals, but you can get many lengths, many heights. They're lightweight. They're easy to install. I've never used them, but my understanding is they sort of snap together to create your oval or your circle. But metal does absorb heat, so you need to be really careful what you planted right near them. And you don't really want the plant's roots to be next to the hot metal. I know I'd be bumping up against it and hurting myself, but there are now some heat reflective options where the manufacturer puts a heat reflective coating on the outside. So perhaps that's not as much of an issue. But they are very expensive. They cost several $100s, but they're easy to move. So, you know, if you wanted to start with one maybe little circle in the beginning and see what you like, there's nothing that says you can't start a raised bed garden with one of each kind of material and pick the one you like the best. You can go really upscale and have a pro come in and install a stone raised bed. They would be very expensive, obviously, not just because of the material, but because of the labor. And they are permanent, but they can be quite lovely. There are places for those too. Now, as far as shapes and configurations, this is the same picture I showed you before, set in a U configuration. It's really kind of nice. You can walk around. There is easy access to all the beds. Rectangles are easy to build because you just have 4 sides and 4 90-degree angles. In this particular garden, there's great wheelbarrow access when you're coming in with your soil amendments or your mulch if you put wood chips down around in the walk space. And there's good space between the beds and the fence, which is nice. You can get around there. And there's room to expand. So this is a really nice idea for configuration. And let's see, but the one downside of this is that if I were to irrigate with a soaker hose, there's a gap between the beds. So I'd either have water dripping in my walkway, or if I somehow rigged up, connected a length of solid hose between them, I could do that, or if I had 3 separate hoses. But if you connect your U's, right, you see how they're not a separate bed, it's one solid complete U. You can lay your soaker hose right around that whole bed. And this too is easy to construct because you just have straightaways and 90-degree angles. In this particular garden, I like it because there's a nice wheelbarrow access in the middle there. And it seems to have good access to both sides of the bed. I don't know how wide they really are. If they were 3.5 feet, I think you could probably reach over to the other side. I don't know. it doesn't look like there's a lot of room to expand this garden, but maybe the owner didn't need room to expand. But one thing that really kind of bugs me about this particular picture is there is no space between the fence and the bed. So maybe that doesn't bother whoever built it. I don't know. You could build a little triangle. It's a very creative use of small space, although you'd have to watch the shade from the building. I imagine that's their house. There is great access. This is a good option if you have little ones, whether they're your children or your grands or nieces, nephews, and you want them to have a successful garden. Maybe you have really young children around who really want to help you garden, but you kind of don't want them in your garden too much. You can give them their own little space. But I wonder how much room there really is to grow here. If you're going to do it for little kids and you grow something easy like radishes and maybe a green bean or two, maybe some lettuce, that would be fun. But the angles in a triangle are a little challenging to construct, right? To get those corners together. L shape is really cool, right? This is a great use of space. You're right by a patio here, so I imagine there's easy access to water. It looks like a sunny spot, but look at that little tree just beyond the bed. I don't know how far away that is, but we know that little trees can grow into big trees and big trees can cast shade. But maybe the owner figures by the time that tree might shade this raised bed, they'll have moved it or done something else with it, okay? But think about an L shape too in your yard. That's kind of neat. And here's some other ways that L shapes are used. In the back, on the right side of this picture, you can see that it really helps define the yard space. So we're not just now thinking about growing our vegetables, we're thinking about a more structured feeling in the backyard and maybe creating walkways and creating spaces to sit. This has a little ledge, these raised beds. They're really gorgeous. I would think of, if I was going to do this, I'd have a professional come in because these are some pretty heavy duty things. But as a do-it-yourselfer and a real garden lover, my issue with building raised beds out of something this wide is that you now limit your garden space, right? So your bed is out to here, but your garden space is only, a fraction of that portion. So, I love the way this looks. This is nice for a flower garden, but for vegetables, this is not what I would choose myself. And here's a picture of what I'm talking about, building a whole backyard raised bed landscape, right? You can see that you can walk by that tree on the right. You can come around into that little walkway here and have a little space. Maybe you'd put a little bench in here. The raised beds in the back are a good spot for your smaller shrubs and things, and you can intermix flowers and vegetables. It's really a lovely, lovely design, and it helps you manage your garden spaces. Are there any questions about, I'm going to talk more about actually constructing your raised bed in the next section, but are any questions about the options of materials or shapes or sizes?
Yeah, there were quite a few inquiries about pressure treated lumber.
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would not recommend pressure treated lumber. I know it lasts longer, but you never know what's in it and what might or might not leach into the soil. So personally, I shy away from it for that reason.
Yeah, definitely old pressure treated lumber.
Absolutely, you
If
don't
it's
want that.
newer, I mean, there is controversy around this topic,
There is.
but I believe that they're trying to make improvements to this all the time. And you just have to really know what you're purchasing, okay? And look at what the risks are for the current
Yes.
use of that particular wood.
Yes.
Traditionally, treated lumber was treated with arsenic, and that's
Yes.
the CCA, and that it's no longer treated with arsenic.
Right.
Yes.
A lot of people will use it, but don't plant anything right up next to it. Like, especially like leafy vegetables that are going to touch the wood and then you're going to eat.
Eat the vegetable, right, right. That's why I chose not to do it.
Questions about how often to water. And I know you had talked about watering before.
So you water when the soil is dry, right? You don't, if it just rained yesterday, and it rained a good bit, you probably don't have to water today. Go, put your finger in and see how damp the soil feels, or put a water meter in and see. It's, yeah, if the soil's damp, you don't water.
Well, one of the things Diane wrote in the chat, in the Q&A was, if you want to conserve water,
Mhm.
then using drip irrigation, which I believe you'll mention more later, and then mulching helps keep the water in, so you're not
Yes.
having to overwater, and you'll be able to gauge over time how often you need to water your garden just by monitoring how your soil dries up. And
Right.
are we going to cover square foot gardening at all?
No,
Okay,
no.
sorry,
But
folks.
that's easy to use in a raised bed, though. I use some square foot gardening
Right.
techniques in my raised beds. And if you know you have a 4-foot bed, you don't necessarily have to put in the strings and the borders that are recommended, because you can just kind of figure, oh, I'm about halfway in. That's 2 feet. I can fit a zucchini in there or something, right?
Exactly.
So you can eyeball it a little better.
All
What
right.
I found in my raised beds, that even on the hottest days, the dog days of summer, I only have to water in the morning. Things like my cucumbers might wilt in the afternoon sun, but it doesn't mean that they don't have enough water. They're just getting wilty like I do in the heat of the sun. And once the sun goes down, they perk up, as do I. I have my eyes popping. I'm a happy camper. So
Someone wants to know if you can reuse cedar playground wood. Like if you had a playground set made from cedar.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I would use it as long as it wasn't pressure treated, because my preference is to avoid any kind of chemically treated wood.
But if it's cedar,
That's a cedar, that would be excellent, and it's excellent to reuse it. Yes.
okay, as long as it's not treated.
Well, that's
And
my preference,
and for some of the raised beds you showed, there were some metal braces on the outside.
We're getting to that.
You're getting to that. Okay, why don't we move ahead?
We're going to talk about construction and corners and all that stuff. And the way we're going to do it is we are going to create a raised bed garden from start to finish.
All
We're gonna
right.
Get all that stuff in it, okay? So here we have a fellow who selected his site. He put in stakes to say, this is how big I want my whole garden to be. He's clearing debris. I don't know what that was, but it's a sunny site. And if you start with just 1 or 2 beds, there's room for expansion. So there you go. Select the site, maybe stake it out, and then you'll want to probably remove the grass and weeds. Now I say probably because for beds that are 12 inches or more in height, you can just lay down some newspaper or cardboard, and that will smother the grass and the weeds, right? Because you're going to have a whole layer of soil on top of it. If you're only going to go 1 layer high, like I do, 6 inches, that's where I would suggest digging in organic matter before you put your, like, figure out where you want your bed and dig in organic matter down. I dug down about 10 to 12 inches, right? So I had good soil. I know I have good soil down in that earth, and then 6 inches more on top. I do not put in anything underneath for burrowing animals in my garden, because I want to make sure the roots can go down as far as they want to go, particularly because I plant potatoes and I start them down deep. The other reason I don't do it is we put in a really heavy duty fencing system because I have all sorts of critters, deer, raccoons, groundhogs. And what I did was we rented a trencher and I put hardware cloth, steel cloth. I buried it 3.5 feet down and then built a fence. So I don't put anything under my raised beds. That's not my experience. You could try that. see if it works. I don't think I really have voles. I have mice and squirrels and chipmunks. Oh my. But that works for me. Your mileage may vary. I don't know. Now that we have the site picked out and we have it prepped, we need to construct our frames. I'm going to talk about constructing a wooden frame because the metal ones come as a kit, and the brick, you know how to lay brick and stuff. So let me talk about the wooden frames because that's what I have, and that's really the most construction. You can get a do-it-yourself kit, and I'll talk about those in a second. So for a wooden raised bed in some kind of a square or rectangle, you really only need 4 sides and 4 corners. So how do you create and secure those corners? Well, one quick way is to get a post like that, right? Cut it to the length you want or have it cut, and then just secure the boards to that post, right? Screw them in. Don't nail them because nails pop out. Screw them in. And this is quick and easy. What I found though in looking at community gardens is after a couple of years, those sideboards might warp and might crack and the corners start disconnecting a little bit. It takes, 4 to 5 years, so that's not so bad. But that's not a corner that I chose, okay? Here's a do-it-yourself kit that's readily available, and this is the first one that I used, and they're in my garden now. This was available from one of the warehouse stores. The post you can see has grooves cut in it to accept the sides, and it makes kind of a tongue and groove joint, right? The edge of the boards are notched so that they slide right into that post and they don't come out, right? The problem is if that sideboard is 1 inch wide and you notch it, you now have less than 1 inch of wood. And no matter what kind of wood you have, that less than 1 inch space is going to rot and decay pretty darn quickly. And once it goes, the side falls off and it's really hard to replace because I don't know about you, but I'm not that good at woodworking that I can notch the end of the wood like that to be in a trapezoid shape, right? Now, what I did when mine rotted was I took a chisel to the post to try to open up that end, and I tried to jam a straight board in, and it kind of sort of worked maybe, but I give this kind of system 2 thumbs down. It's my least favorite corner because it's not easy to replace. Definitely easy to put together, but not easy to replace. So the next kind of corner I looked at were these plastic corners. They have that black post in the bottom that you pound into the ground so it secures the bed in place. And they have these at perfect 90-degree angles, the little holders that will accept 2 inch wide lumber. So you'd get 2x4s or 2x6s to slide into those holders, and they slide in quickly. There are little holes in the plastic so that you could pre-drill and screw in your screws. And the posts interconnect to each other so you can stack them and build taller beds. These are really nice. I was pretty happy with this. Now note the color of the corner when it's brand new. And here's the color of the corner in my garden. I've had it for a few years, so the sun has faded it. But also the sun is making it a little brittle, and I'm afraid it's going to crack soon. Now, this picture looks much different than the other one because I was too cheap to buy 2 inch wide boards. So I bought 1 inch wide boards, but the holder wants 2 inch wide. So I just stuck in a piece of scrap wood and screwed it in, and that worked just fine. You can see the scrap wood is rotting out quickly because there's probably just some piece of pine or something, but that's okay. I don't mind because I can easily take the screw out, put in a new piece and screw it back in. The brittleness of the corner is what's starting to concern me now. And so I give it 1 thumbs down because it's my second least favorite corner. My favorite corner. I am a happy camper with this corner. These are metal. They're made out of a non-rusting, probably aluminum, but they're thick. They don't bend. They're thick. Again, these accept the 2x, and I'm too cheap to buy 2-inch wide, so I bought 1-inch boards. I don't mind replacing them. They're still okay in there. There's no rusting. There's no cracking. I love these. Now, I talk about a removable cap because the cap makes it a nice little pretty corner. But when I want to put in a trellis, oh, this is great. That little corner part is hollow. This was my son's idea. I was like, you know, I really want to put a trellis in. And he said, go get some rebar, Mom. So we hammered some rebar into the ground, into that hollow corner. Then I just put some PVC over it, right? Bought a PVC corner, put another little length, and I've got my trellis. I wrap some twine around. And if I have these corners on multiple beds, I can easily move my trellis from bed to bed as I'm rotating my crops, right? Brilliant. That's what kids are for. So these are my absolute favorite. I give them 15 green thumbs up. Look for metal corners. Now, if you don't want a corner like that, you can just buy these simple metal brackets. They're sold in various sizes, so you can make tall or shorter raised beds. Again, I suggest pre-drilling your hole so you don't crack the wood. Drill a little hole, screw in your screws, done. If you don't like the look of that corner or you want a more decorative corner, look at the picture on the right. There are all these fancy schmancy kinds of brackets you can buy. They do look lovely. I don't recall if they come in various heights. So the one downside of this is that you're not going to be able to really stack your boards to have a taller raised bed. But metal, all the way metal. Now, here's what I'm going to talk about, the length. So normally, you know, I said the length goes in 4-foot pieces. That's because that's how most kits are sold, right? If you're buying the corners separately, like I did, you get the corners and you buy your lumber, you can go 8 foot as long as it's just a single row bed. A little higher, you might want to put in these connectors in the middle to make sure that your boards don't bow out over time. Now, these connectors are sold in all different heights, as you can see on the picture in the right. And I would install them every 4 feet. You can stack your boards. Now, these connectors, instead of creating a right angle, right, they're out straight, so you have your board going straight down. They also have a connector in the middle, so if you want, you can put an extra board in the middle of your bed. It's a bit of a divider for your bed. It doesn't bother you. It'll help you eyeball your 4 feet for your square foot gardening if you want to do that. And it helps keep the bed straight. If you don't do this and you have a tall raised bed, you'll need to either put in rebar to support the side or some kind of metal post or wooden post or something, because the longer your bed gets, the more likely your wood will bow, and then your beds are starting to fall apart and your soil falls out, and it's just a whole mess that you want to avoid. Okay, so we've picked our site, we've cleared it, we've built our raised beds. Now we maybe have planned out where they are, but once you have the beds built, you start laying them out to see how you want your garden to be, right? You want to put in walkways so that you can walk around and work in your garden. For just simple walkways, for weeding and harvesting and watering, 18 inches is about the most narrow you'd want to go, I found, because that gives you room to maneuver and turn and bring in a pail or a bucket to harvest. But for wheelbarrows, you want something a little bit wider, 24 inches maybe, and really do save some space for wheelbarrows to get around, because you're not going to want to shovel and walk in the garden and shovel. It'd be too much like shoveling snow, and you don't want to do that. So you can see the fellows here are laying down the beds. and walking around. Now, they don't appear to be putting in any wheelbarrow accessible walkways, so I would say, think about that. And once we have our raised beds in, now it's time to fill with soil and organic matter, and think about covering your walkways with something. A lot of people like wood chips. Some people like gravel. I prefer landscape fabric because I can move it around. If it tears or wears out, I can pull it up and put down new. I can put in 2-3 layers if I like, and I just secure them with U-pins, right? These are pins that are in the shape of a U that you stick in, almost like bobby pins in your hair, right? And so you put in your irrigation system however you want. They appear to have a hose laying there. You may need to fence it. Fencing is another whole topic. But if you have critters, you're going to need some kind of fencing, and you're ready to plant. The other thing, if you put in landscape fabric and put something like wood chips on top, after a few years from walking on the wood chips, they're going to decompose, right? And then they're going to end up creating kind of a soil environment, and you're going to get weeds. So that's why my personal favorite is just bare landscape fabric. And there you have it. Are there any questions?
Okay. People would like to know where you buy those corners and those brackets.
Right,
Like-
so I bought them online. I don't recall exactly where, but you Google raised bed brackets or raised bed kits, and you'll find them. There are so many of them out there.
Okay.
Mhm.
Before we go to any more questions, can you just advance the slide,
Oh,
Jane?
yes, there you go.
Let me just go through this,
Absolutely.
and then you can continue with questions. So I just want to thank you all for attending, and thank you, Jane, for the presentation. So when I end this webinar session, there will be a survey that opens up in your browser, and we do really appreciate if you could take 2 minutes. It's 5, simple questions, and to share your feedback with us. If you have any questions about these coffee talks, please send them to the email address mgmcsymposium@gmail.com at any time, and I will be glad to answer your questions. And if you live in Monmouth County and you have just general questions about gardening anytime, please email mgarden@co.monmouth.nj.us, and either Diane or another master gardener will answer them. If you live in another county or state, please contact your local master gardener office. And again, thank you for being here. Next week's topic is native ornamental grasses for New Jersey. So I hope you can join us then. And okay, Jane, try to answer all the rest of the questions that came in, and
Okie dokie.
appreciate it.
Sure.
We had a lot of questions on fencing for animals. I did see, like, in one of your first slides, you kind of had a mesh fence on the top of the individual bed.
Yes. So when I first created my garden, I put in that steel hardware cloth, and then I put up deer fencing around it. And so that seemed to help. We have a lot of deer, and they just come right through my backyard all the time. Now what I have, and then I played with different kinds of materials. Sometimes I had plastic, the orange color plastic. Sometimes I had green. Now what I found is the steel mesh with the black deer netting that goes up about 5 feet. Seems to work for me.
How about for smaller animals like squirrels?
I've not seen squirrels in my garden. Squirrels do climb. I actually did see a groundhog trying to climb the steel mesh fence in my garden. So it depends on the size of your garden and how committed you are to keeping that garden, right? If you have just a couple of raised beds, you can put a smaller fence around it. I would really like to see something 5 feet high, because that might really discourage a squirrel. I don't know. That's not something I really need to deal with in my yard.
Jane, do you know anything about linseed oil used to protect?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I forgot to
wood?
talk about that. So you can coat your boards, your wooden boards, with linseed, or actually tung oil is better. I've seen that done in our community. I chose not to do that because you have to reapply every year. Some people like to do that because they like the color that it brings out in the wood, and that's fine. But just remember, you may have to reapply every year or two to keep that color and to keep that protection. I would steer people away from painting them because the paint might chip and you don't know where to go, and you don't want paint chips in your soil. And that you'd absolutely have to maintain, right? Remember, I'm a lazy gardener. I want to just plant my plants, water them, and pick oodles of peppers and tomatoes and radishes. So I don't want to have to reapply stuff, but you can. It does not seem, at least in my garden, to affect the longevity of my cedar.
Okay. And in general, people were asking about what the good times of day are to work in the garden.
Oh, whenever you're comfortable out there,
Whenever
I'm
you're
out there
comfortable, I mean,
different
clearly
times.
not in the we're not going to recommend in the heat of the
Not in the
day.
heat of the day for a couple of reasons. One, it's just too hot and it's too hard to stay hydrated. The other, and you get sunburned, like me. The other is that, remember I said when you have the heat of the July and August afternoons, your plants will start to wilt, and you don't want to go in the garden and look at them then, because you'll freak out and you'll want to water them and you'll overwater them and you'll worry. So in the heat of the day, just, take a walk, go to the beach, get in the air conditioning, sit by a fan, have a little lemonade, and leave your garden be.
I would imagine it's also a good time not to disturb the roots of the plants.
Not
If
to
they're
disturb.
under stress in the heat, hot part of the day, you wouldn't want to go out there and start doing a big weeding job.
Right.
So,
Let them recover. So in the very, very hottest days of summer, I go out in the morning, early morning when it's coolest. I'm out there at 7 in the morning. When it gets to be 9 or 10, I'm out of the garden, and I don't go back in until 6 or 7 after dinner when it's cooler.
do you cover your garden in the winter?
I do not. Well, that's not true. Yes, sometimes I do. Not all the time, but I'll take the shredded leaves and I'll cover the top of the garden. Yes.
Mm.
I've been thinking of planting cover crops, and I just never have. But cover crops would be another way to cover your garden. You could
Right.
mulch also.
Right, but that's a great place to put your leaf mulch.
Mm-hmm.
When we say that, we mean, when you say shredded leaf mulch, you mean shredded, not just whole leaves, because they're harder to break down.
Whole leaves will mat together.
The mat
So
together, right?
my husband is kind enough to run the lawnmower with the bag over the leaves, so the lawnmower chops up the leaves. You can also buy a leaf shredder
Oh,
device.
I have one now. It's one of the best toys.
Yes, so
So,
you can use that. I don't have space in my garage for that, so we just run it over with the lawnmower. That's the lazy man's way to do it. And he dumps it in the garden for me, and I spread it.
yeah, it works out really well, actually.
Mhm.
If anybody's looking for a garden toy,
Now,
I
I do have
recommend
to
it.
say, when my boys were really young, this is a pretty funny story. They used to love to jump in the leaves. And so I kept the pile of leaves in the front yard, and I would move it now and then so I didn't kill the grass. And they would jump in the leaves. They rode their bicycles into the leaves. They skated into the leaves. And so they ended up chopping up the leaves for me. And so just playing with the leaves with my son, we had great, great shredded leaves for the garden.
So, Marcia asks, hi, Marcia, do you have to add any new soil each year to your beds? And from what we've been talking about, adding compost, adding shredded leaf mulch on top, it leaches down.
Yes.
You tend to not have to add new soil necessarily.
You tend not to. That's right. That's right. Because the amendments you put in there help a lot. I did, though, one year I decided that my soil was beyond amending. So what I did was I dug out the soil and put it in flower beds, and I had new soil and mushroom compost delivered because I decided enough, I have to start from scratch. So I did. And at that point, then I rearranged my beds too.
Okay.
So,
Okay, we're getting a bunch of questions here.
okay.
Okay, let's see. Can you address picking the yield in the morning in terms of nutrients being highest in the morning?
Well, I don't know that nutrients are highest in the morning, but the water content is. So for lettuces and things, I find that they're better in the morning.
They're
Yeah.
fresher. Yeah, that
Yes.
makes a whole lot of sense.
And my
Uh,
peppers are just so solid, and you know, I gave one to a cousin who ate it like an apple. It was just so juicy and wonderful.
okay. Uh, do you put leaf mulch on top of the cloth? I think
No,
we're talking about putting that only on top of the garden bed,
only on top of the soil, right?
right? Because you want to,
I want to keep my cloth clean. In fact, I've been known to sweep my walkways now and again.
okay.
I know it's a
Do
little crazy, but
do you worry about ticks in your leaves?
um, no, not really. Um, if I have the pile back where I know the deer go a lot, I'll think a little bit about it, but that's not been a problem for me, particularly in the shredded leaves. I think the ticks would like to hide more in the whole leaves. But no, that's not been a problem for me. I don't get ticks.
Right, in the shredded leaves, I haven't experienced it either.
Right.
Someone covers their garden in black plastic in October and then lifts it up in May and they have no weeds.
Oh, well, that's a
So
good idea. And you're also heating up your soil, which is nice to plant in.
it's not a bad thing. You're probably going to get your soil warmer in the spring.
Right.
Uh, Soil testing. We should make sure people understand that they can get their soil tested through
Yes.
Rutgers.
Yes, you can. The instructions are online. You get your kit for $20. It tells you exactly how to collect your soil, and you mail it in, and they'll send you back a fabulous report about what's in your soil and how exactly you need to amend it and with what for the kinds of things you want to grow there. So it'll be specific to what you want to grow.
Okay, and they can stop in and order that at the ag building.
Well, not yet, but as soon as we open after the pandemic, yes.
No, we're open.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, we're open when we
Yay.
have tests. So $20, cash or check, come on in.
Oh, you heard it here first. I'm so excited.
Kozlowski Road.
And people
So,
can also just Google Rutgers Soil Testing Laboratory, and you can find out everything you need to know about soil testing.
But if you want to get one from our office, you can even email mgarden at the address that's on the
Right
screen right now.
I'm garden at
And Diane will get back to you and tell you where to go to get your kit.
right.
Now, where do we get mushroom compost? Is it hard to find?
I know of a local nursery that has it regularly. Don't know if I'm allowed to say or not, but if you don't get mushroom compost, there are nurseries that have compost that they can put in, deliver half and half for you.
So I guess it's a matter of finding a local nursery that has mushroom compost. Sometimes the ones that actually have it, I've noticed, will advertise it on a big sign outside their garden center.
That's true too,
They
right?
actually put up a big sign that they have mushroom compost. And once you find one, you still have to, make sure it's clean when you go in there, take a look at it.
Sure,
So,
sure.
um,
Or ask other gardeners in your area who have used it,
oh, Joanne says Bartels and Clark has mushroom compost.
Ah,
Okay. So,
Also
it's not that long a drive if you really want it.
in Lincroft, Monmouth County, it's Molson's.
Molzones, yeah.
Molson's?
Molzones. Molzon apostrophe S. The other thing that I really love, given that we're kind of coming out of pandemic, the other thing I really love about going to your local nurseries is they're often family owned. They're small businesses, and they're going to bend over backwards to make you happy. So you support a family and a small business.
There was a good question. I don't know if you would really even consider a raised bed, but what about raised beds without walls, like just long mounds in the garden? That's
That's
not,
more of a berm. That's berm gardening, right?
yeah.
I would not do that because I would be afraid it would wash away in heavy rains. Berms can sometimes be hard to maintain.
Mhm.
And then you have all that surface area for weeds. And remember, I'm the lazy one. I don't want to be pulling weeds. So, and then depending on how high you make it, I'm not sure that it's easy to reach. So I'm not a fan of berms for vegetable gardens.
It does wash down into the aisles, and then you're constantly fighting the weeds. So it is good to have, for raised beds, the idea of having a separate section makes it easier to maintain.
And a frame to hold the soil, a solid frame.
Okay, I think we're good.
Excellent.
One thing I forgot to say, Diane,
Mhm.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so a few people asked if we could email the Q&A to them. And yes, I can do that, but it'll take me a little while to clean it up before I send it to you. So I will be sending all registrants a link to the recording of this session if you want to watch it again. And I will also send out the Q&A so you have a record of it.
Lisa threw a good question in there because I have to say I have the same one. I was trying to look it up as well, Lisa, while we were having the talk. She was looking up those brackets that you installed midway down the long board.
Yes. The center.
Yeah, but
Connections?
I know I couldn't find them. So is there
Okay.
a certain brand or type that you know by chance what it is?
I don't know the name offhand. I'm sorry. I will find it and I'll send it to Debbie and she can put it in the Q&A that she sends out.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Also, somebody said, what about compost from your county? It's probably fine. I just don't know, if
We
there's
don't know
grass
we
clippings.
right. We don't know what's in it, right?
Yeah.
If there are grass clippings from grass that's been heavily chemically fertilized or something,
Yeah.
I use my own compost because I know what I put in it. So yeah.
So, people have great questions here. And although we're running the coffee talks the rest of this month, like Debbie mentioned, I'm going to throw out there that folks might want to keep in mind that next month in March, March 3rd, at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a virtual helpline with Diane Larson. Okay. So if you register for that event via the library, Monmouth County Library website, there's an address there where you send specific questions for that event. And we do a live answer to your question that night at 7 p.m. So just another thought for folks that like the interactive Q&A.
Or if a question comes up after we're finished, I'm like, oh, I forgot to ask. Right.
All right, then. Sounds like we're wrapping
People
up.
really have some nice things to say. So thank you, Jane, for everything.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Get out in those gardens with those loppers and the weeders and enjoy your gardens. And thank you so much. We really appreciate you all being here. Thank you, Jane. Wonderful job.
Very welcome.
Thank you,
Very welcome.
Diane.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.